It was Halloween night in 2015, my freshman year of high school. I was out with my friends Taylor, Max, and Chris, hitting the town for candy. We decided to dress as Super Mario characters, which seemed like a great idea at the time. I went as Luigi since I was the second tallest. Max, being short and stocky, fit perfectly as Mario. Chris was Waluigi, tall and lanky, just like the character. And Taylor, well, he was Wario because he had the build for it. We lived in a suburban neighborhood with lots of space between houses, which usually meant more walking and less candy. But that year, we made a pact to fill our pillowcases to the brim, even if it meant walking longer. As the night went on and most of the younger kids headed home, we kept pushing forward, determined to hit every house with a light on. Eventually, we reached one of the last houses on a quiet street, near the edge of the nature preserve. It was a small place with no decorations except for a purple bucket on the porch, a sign of candy for the taking. But when I got closer, I realized it was empty. As I turned back to the group, I heard a knock on one of the front windows, followed by a voice calling, "Wait." The front door creaked open, and a middle-aged man stepped outside. He looked to be in his late 40s, already balding, with a strange smile on his face. He offered to let us in, saying he had more candy inside. Taylor and Max were eager, but something about the situation felt off to me. I told them I'd rather wait outside, and eventually Taylor convinced the others to leave. We apologized to the man and walked away quickly. He stood there on his porch watching us with an unreadable expression as we hurried off into the night. If the story ended there, it would have just been another Halloween, but things took a turn soon after. We moved on, skipping the houses near his place just to put some distance between us. We found ourselves near the nature preserve, where the houses were more spread out, and the darkness seemed to swallow the street. As we walked, I noticed Chris had stopped, staring into the woods. "I heard something moving back there," he said, gesturing to the trees. Max and I tried to reassure him, chalking it up to a raccoon or stray dog, but the unease had started to settle in. We kept moving, but every few steps I'd glance back, half expecting to see something lurking behind us. After a while, even Taylor seemed to pick up on the tension, and he called out into the woods, "Hey, whoever's out there, just leave us alone." The silence that followed was suffocating. Then came the snap of a twig. It was subtle, but unmistakable. The sound seemed to trigger something in all of us. Chris and I bolted first, Taylor following close behind. Max hesitated, trying to put on a brave front, but he quickly fell in line once he realized we weren't waiting around. We sprinted down the dark, empty street, our pillowcases of candy swinging wildly in our hands. When Taylor's house finally came into view, we turned sharply down his driveway and ran straight into the backyard, bursting through the back door. Inside, we rushed to the living room window, peering out into the night. There was no one in sight, but our breaths came in quick, panicked bursts. We were trying to make sense of what just happened when the backyard gate suddenly creaked and then slammed shut. Taylor's face went pale, and he jumped up to turn off the lights. A second later, there was a loud click and a thud from the den, like a door being forced open. Grabbing the nearest knives from the kitchen, we crept downstairs, turning on the back porch light. The yard was empty, but the unease lingered. We stayed there, frozen in place, until the front door swung open, and we all screamed. But instead of a stranger, it was just Taylor's mom and his sisters, back from a Halloween party. The relief washed over us, but the weirdness of the night lingered. We explained everything, though Taylor downplayed the story to his mom to avoid freaking her out. Max and I eventually left and headed home, thinking that was the end of it. But at 12:30 a.m., I got a text from Taylor that made my blood run cold. It wasn't my mom, it read. Confused, I texted back, asking what he meant. After a long pause, he replied, "It wasn't my mom in the backyard." I felt a chill run through me as I quickly typed out a response, asking him to clarify. He told me that when his mom got home, she swore she hadn't been anywhere near the backyard. He checked again from his upper deck, but there was no one there. They called the police, but when they came, they found nothing. Just a few broken branches near the edge of the woods. Taylor mentioned the man who had tried to invite us into his house earlier that night, but nothing ever came of it. The police couldn't find a trace of him. And while the neighborhood returned to normal after that Halloween, the memory of those footsteps in the shadowy woods stuck with me, creeping back into my mind every October. When I was 10, my parents finally let me go trick-or-treating without them for the first time. I remember feeling so grown up, heading out with my best friend Will, who was also 10. We had to be back home by 9 p.m., and I remember constantly checking my watch, knowing the time was ticking away. It was close to 9 p.m., but we were determined to hit as many houses as possible. Our town wasn't great for trick-or-treating. The houses were spread out, so there was a lot of walking for not much candy. After visiting a few houses with dim porch lights and closing doors, we reached a place that stood alone on the corner of Elm Street, surrounded by tall, dense bushes. It had a spooky charm, and the decorations seemed a bit too authentic. We approached the front door and rang the bell. An older man, probably in his mid-50s, with thinning gray hair and a drooping mustache, answered. His voice was rough but oddly cheerful as he asked us about our costumes, treating us like we were little kids. He seemed genuinely surprised when he realized we were alone. "Your parents aren't with you?" he asked, his eyes scanning the empty street behind us. It made me uneasy, but before I could think too much about it, he swung the door open wider, revealing a cardboard tunnel decorated with fake spider webs, rubber bats, and other Halloween props running through his living room. "You want candy? You have to make it through the haunted tunnel," he announced with a grin. It was tempting. What kid wouldn't want to crawl through a spooky obstacle course? Will and I exchanged a glance, our curiosity outweighing any caution. We both shrugged and said, "Okay." The man waved us inside, but as he did, he glanced outside one more time before slowly shutting the door. I crawled into the tunnel first, with Will following right behind me. Inside it was cramped and pitch dark except for the dim orange glow of Halloween lights strung through the cardboard. The decorations made it look like a haunted maze, but as we crawled deeper, the tunnel seemed longer than it should have been. When we finally reached the end, we found ourselves in a small room, barely lit by the same orange lights. A handwritten sign pointed to a door at the back of the room that read, "Candy this way." Will turned the doorknob, revealing a staircase leading down to a basement where more orange lights glowed faintly below. But the man was nowhere to be seen. Something didn't feel right, but we were already in too deep, literally. We hesitated, but curiosity won out, and we slowly made our way down the creaky wooden steps, whispering to each other about what kind of candy might be waiting for us. As we reached the bottom, it became clear that the basement was empty. There were no bowls of candy, no decorations, just dusty shelves and old boxes piled in the corners. Suddenly, the basement door above us slammed shut. We both jumped, and a cold realization crept over me. We ran back up the stairs, banging on the door and shouting for help, but it wouldn't budge. My heart pounded in my chest as panic set in. Then we heard the sound of the doorbell ringing over and over again upstairs, followed by muffled voices. Will pressed his ear against the basement door, trying to listen, and I did the same. We heard the front door creak open and the sound of two voices arguing. Without warning, we started yelling, hoping whoever was up there would hear us. The voices grew louder, and then, to our shock, the basement door unlocked and swung open. A man and a woman stood there, the woman rushing toward us with open arms, whispering, "It's okay, it's okay. You're safe now." They led us out of the house, past the man who had trapped us. He stood in the corner of his living room watching us with a twisted expression, as if he was disappointed we got away. The husband shouted at him, calling him a sick freak, while the wife hurried us out the door. They took us across the street to their house, where the woman sat us down on the couch, offering us water as she tried to calm us. Her husband was already on the phone with the police, giving them the address and explaining what happened. The woman asked us gently, "How did he convince you to go inside?" We explained about the obstacle course and how he shut the door after us. It turned out the couple had seen us enter the house and thought it looked suspicious, so they came over to check on us. The police arrived soon after, and after searching the house, they found enough evidence to arrest the man. At the time, Will and I didn't fully grasp the seriousness of what had almost happened. But looking back now, I can't help but feel grateful that the neighbors had been watching out for us. I still get chills when I think about that night, knowing how close we came to something far worse. Halloween had always been my favorite time of year. In Oak Ridge, our little town, Halloween wasn't just a night, it was an event. Every house on every block dripped with decorations, jack-o'-lanterns, skeletons, and haunted lawn displays. Maple Street, where my best friend Mia and I were headed, was the crown jewel of the night, known for full-size candy bars and the best decorations. This year, Mia had convinced me to ditch the usual group and do our own rounds. "We'll hit the big houses first," she'd said with a glint in her eye. "No one's as fast as us." It seemed like a solid plan at first, but as we made our way up the long stretch of Maple Street, I couldn't shake the weird feeling in my gut. Most houses were lively, packed with kids and adults mingling on porches. But when we reached the last house, a chill crept into the air. It sat at the edge of town, where the pavement met the woods. It was the only house without a porch light on, no decorations. In a sea of Halloween, it was just dark and quiet. "Let's skip it," I said, pulling on Mia's arm. But she shook her head. "It's probably the jackpot house. They don't want everyone coming for their candy," she said, smirking. And just like that, she bounded up the steps, leaving me standing on the sidewalk, alone. I watched as she reached the top and rang the doorbell. No one answered. She tried again, more impatiently this time. I scanned the street behind us. Most of the kids had moved further down, out of sight. Mia turned back to me, rolling her eyes. "Come on, they're home. Look." She pointed to the dim light seeping through the curtains in an upstairs window. She tried the doorknob, and to my horror, it twisted open. "Mia, don't," I hissed, but she was already slipping inside, laughing at my hesitation. I took a deep breath and followed her. The house smelled like damp wood and something metallic. We called out, "Trick or treat." Our voices echoed through the empty hallways. I followed Mia down the narrow corridor, my flashlight bouncing off faded wallpaper and crooked picture frames. It felt wrong being there, like we'd crossed a line, but Mia just kept going, curiosity leading her deeper into the house. "Let's go, Mia. It's weird in here," I whispered, but she shushed me, pointing to a closed door at the end of the hallway. "Just one more, I promise, then we'll go." She pushed the door open, revealing what looked like a study. It was surprisingly tidy compared to the rest of the house. A desk sat in the corner, papers and a few old books scattered across its surface. Mia started rifling through them, and I felt my anxiety spike. "This is trespassing, Mia, come on." But she froze suddenly, holding up a list, her face pale. "They've got kids' names on here," she whispered, passing the paper to me. It wasn't just names, it had dates and ages and addresses, including ours. My heart pounded in my chest as I grabbed her arm. "We have to leave, now." Before she could argue, we heard a creak from the stairs behind us. I whipped my head around, expecting to see someone, but the hallway was empty. We ran for the front door, but as we reached it, we heard footsteps. Mia gasped and veered toward the kitchen instead, pulling me along. I slammed the back door behind us, and we darted into the woods behind the house, scrambling through the underbrush. I glanced back once, catching a glimpse of a shadowy figure standing on the back porch. They didn't move, just watched us until we disappeared into the trees. We ran until my lungs burned, until we stumbled out onto a nearby road. Mia swore never to speak of what happened, and we both deleted the photos of the list she'd taken on her phone. But that night, I couldn't stop thinking about the figure just standing there unbothered as we ran. The house went dark the next morning, and by the time we tried to return with the police, it was empty. No furniture, no study, no list. The official story was that the owners had moved out suddenly, but I know what I saw. And every Halloween since, when I see that house at the end of Maple Street, I can't shake the feeling that someone is still watching, waiting for the next pair of curious kids to come knocking.